Hello, fellow splitting geniuses. Welcome to another episode of Splitting Smart, where usually Heather and I have candid, informative discussions with divorce and well-being professionals. But this time I've got Heather in the hot seat. And I get to have a super informative discussion around one of the hardest things in divorce, your financial settlement, and how to prepare yourself mentally and emotionally for it. I am Lila Aiken Ali, a divorcee, a divorce coach, and the founder of Split.fyi. Our mission with Splitting Smart is to provide you with knowledge on various modalities of support that can help you to unhitch with fewer hitches. Heather Steer is not only our guest on today's episode, but she's also the co-founder of Split.fyi. Heather is a CDFA, so that is a Accredited Divorce Financial Analyst, a divorce coach, a divorcee, a mom of two beautiful girls, and an amazing business partner. I can say with my hand over my heart that her ability to understand the lay of the land of finances when it comes to divorce settlement is very comforting for all of us who know her. And it's so necessary for anyone having to divide any class of assets during their divorce. So before we begin, I just wanted to highlight some webinar protocols. And if you have any questions for Heather, specific questions that you haven't already shared with us prior to our webinar, then you can put it in our message box and I'll be monitoring it. And I'll try to get to it during our interview, but most likely we'll leave it to the last 15 minutes of the webinar. Some of you have sent some questions prior to this, and we've pretty much fit those into our discussion. So Heather, this is exciting.
No, I'm so excited to be here. We've been talking about doing this for a while.
I know, finally. It's like the easiest, conversation because we have these kind of conversations every day. So
It's true.
let's share with the world. So for for people out there who don't know what a CDFA does, let's start with that and you and the background and why you became a CDFA and so forth. So.
Yeah, perfect. It definitely folds into a little bit of my divorce story. So at the end of my own divorce, I was sitting with my attorney, and I am a numbers person, and I'm a recovering CPA. That's part of my professional background. And I looked at him and I go, oh, I'm like, who could I have called besides you to work through all of this, all of these numbers? The numbers became so emotional to me. Like, I can sit down with any of my clients and have no problem zinging things out. But the minute that I started looking at my own case and my own details, I froze. I turned into an ostrich. I didn't want to deal with it. I still get emotional around it. There's just, as you're settling assets, it's just all tangled up together.
Right.
So he introduced me to the concept and said, hey, there's this new up and coming divorce resource that's out there. And then he goes, I think you'd be great at it. It's a Certified Divorce Financial Analyst. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I have to reinvent my career. I'd been a stay-at-home mom for 6 years. I was a retired supply chain executive. I couldn't pursue that career path again because I would have had to relocate. I couldn't leave where, I needed to be near my kids' dad. I thought that was important, and so did he, thankfully. So I looked into it, and you have to go through. It's an exam. You study, you learn about how divorce settlements work, how different jurisdictions handle things. Financials, while not as jurisdictionally specific as attorneys, it's still pretty jurisdictional from state to state. There's a lot of different types of settlements and causes that cause assets to be divided differently. Mm-hmm. So you study and you learn about those nuances, and so I pursued that, and I started a private practice. And as I evolved, going back to my story of the emotional ties of finances and it being just so emotional, I became a certified divorce coach, which is where gratefully I got to meet you and be able to bring that skill set to my practice, which has been even, a more powerful combination for people. But the goal of a CDFA is to come in and to help you, if you're not the educated person in the party, then they educate you. They can act as a neutral. They can actually go in and do just the financial mediation and really make sure that things are divided in a fair or equitable or 50-50 way.
Mhm.
They can come up with creative solutions. Like I'm all about trying to work with your set of assets that you're given in order to have the best outcome for your family.
Right.
So maybe it's best to someone gets the house and someone doesn't, or someone isn't going to be able to rebuild retirement. Someone has a better position to continue working and build retirement. So it's, you know, having all those sorts of discussions around the finances. So it's focused on the business side of divorce. And I've taken it to the emotional side as well.
Well, I mean, this is where it's really interesting because I know you and I have talked about this. I mean, amongst our community, and even I was really reliant on my lawyer for the answers, the financial answers, which some lawyers can, and because of virtue of just, you know, years of practice, have an understanding, but that's not their forte. They don't know how to give you that advice. And that's where it's scary, because where something on paper looks good to an individual, like, well, if I have the house, then I'll have that asset and I won't have to pay, you know, these are how the breakdowns they do. But at the end of the day, someone like you will come in and go, well, actually, you'll have to pay this amount of taxes on this, and you have to do this. And can you explain some of just basic line scenarios that you see, common mistakes that happen that maybe a lawyer will tell a client, and then you come and go, that's actually not so good.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true. Someone who is trained as a lawyer, they tend to be a type of person who can read a lot, who can do case law. They aren't financially trained. I have met several attorneys that are amazing when it comes to numbers, but most of them have very little professional training when it comes to understanding the implication of the assets. And I see one of the most common ones is trading dollar for dollar across different types of assets. So a good example, the two biggest assets within most people's cases are retirement and a house. And they're like, oh, that's great. You take $200,000 of the 401k and you get the $200,000 of equity in the house, and there you go, and we'll just trade them. Well, they have very different tax effects, and one's a tax deferred asset, you know, one is more of a current asset, and you're like, that's completely silly. Or they give the house to the person then that actually they draft up everything, and it turns out they can't actually qualify for the loan. They can't actually do the refi, you know, but they're like, oh, it sounds good on paper. And I'm like, well, we gotta have to take it to reality.
Right.
Or they don't know, one of the biggest liabilities in an attorney's world is misvaluing, particularly like a pension.
Mm.
Pensions are very complicated. I even turn those over to people who really spend day in and day out working on pension valuations, because they'll just look at a statement and go, oh, the value of it today is this. Well, that's not really how you settle a pension. You have to go and look at the plan documents. Is it even splittable? Did you go through all the paces to properly split it? So, I mean, I see a lot of mistakes like that. And again, going back to some of the strategic things, like some attorneys are just like, we're splitting each thing. Like I work out of California, so everything is 50-50, each individual account. And it's like, you don't really have to be that black and white about it. You can swap certain accounts, but just being careful and just adjusting values to have it make sense.
Right. And there's a part of it that's also an emotional tie to certain assets, an emotional tie to certain
It
things.
is.
So, and often, and we know this, on the table is the house.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's talk about that song and dance, because I think that's an important thing to just highlight. You know, it's one of the conundrums in any breakup. I mean, that is something that is a safety net for a lot of people. It's their home, and there's a lot of equity in that home. So, can you talk through that scenario? If someone is adamant they want to keep the house, but they really technically can't afford it. In
I
long run.
have this conversation all too often.
Mhm.
And if and I spend a lot of time educating, like, okay, let's sit down and understand, you know, what does the equity look like in the house? What do all of the assets look like? Can you adjust and trade something? What type of relationship are you getting out of? How friendly are you? Would it be an option if you can't immediately get it refied, that the other person helps back you up on a loan? Now that keeps you co-invested and tied together for a longer period of time, which isn't the healthiest for most people. And it, kind of keeps a shadow over you, still being financially tied together. The other thing that I'll tell people is if you do want to buy the house, then treat it like you're buying a new house. This isn't your same house. And don't go, oh, I've lived there for 10 years. I know all of the things going on. It's like, no, go get a detailed inspection. Like, and I'm telling you, go find the inspector that is looking at every crack in every place on the entire property, inspect your roof, inspect everything. And then also, like, particularly if you have any termite or rodent type issues, get those specialized inspections that are, kind of area specific. My personal story, probably one of my biggest financial mistakes of my divorce was not getting a home inspection. I did stay in the marital home, and the next year I had to get a new roof.
Wow.
That was a bummer. So I tell people to always look at that. And then the thing to get educated about is if you are the person that is going to be potentially, let's say, receiving child and spousal support, and you want to keep the house, then you also have to have seasoned funds. Now, typically people will tell you that it's 6 months. I have seen recently some cases, and I know some brokers that have been able to do 3 months of funds. And that means having it paid to you, it's in your bank account, you show that it's paid on time. You also need a signed settlement agreement, and possibly for some lenders, a divorce decree. So that it shows that this is permanent. These are not temporary support orders. These are permanent, or not permanent. They go for a certain runway.
Right.
The other thing to take into account is your child support typically is once the child turns, it's like 15, they will no longer add your child support into the monies in order to get funding, to qualify, because they know that the child's going to age out and you won't be getting that
In a couple of years.
So those are just things to think about. And as you're drafting your settlement, you can also get creative around those things, right? So, in some states where it's less statutorily oriented to calculate your child and spousal support, you can be like, okay, I'm going to give you a little bit more support so that you can get funded. And maybe you trade out another asset for that. I mean, there's all sorts of creative ways to then allow you to get funding if it's that important to stay in the house. The other leg of the stool that I'll talk to people about who want to stay in the house is to make sure they understand how much a house costs to maintain.
Yeah.
It's not like, and when it comes to the budgeting, I spend a lot of time talking to people about budgeting, and people like to think about the budget very, like tactical rather than strategic. So they're like, oh, I pay my rent or my mortgage, I have utilities, I've got food, clothing, and a couple other things. And I'm like, you have to look broader. You've got to look, at a 12, sometimes I'll even go to 36 months. Definitely I encourage 24 months because like I tend to save up for projects, and that's an expense. All those months that I'm putting money away in order for me to redo my driveway. So it's been an expense of mine now for 1.5 years, but I have the money and now I can spend it. So that needed to show up in my budget 1.5 years ago.
Right.
And, or you want to paint, or you want to, or, my hot water heater just told me it was going to go out. I just got notice on that. I was like, oh, great. So there's all these things with owning a house. Like I don't get to call a landlord and say, hey, so, your pipe bursts, your whatever. I mean, it's not just being able to afford the mortgage.
You have to put take into consideration the ongoing costs and the protection. So, and it's a lot to think about, especially when you're going through a divorce.
Yes. And it's a lot, and it is a lot to onboard. And it's also because it's so typical that one person really takes on the responsibility of bill paying and budgeting, and the other person is a bit in the dark. And then they're trying to scramble and get up to speed in the middle of a divorce and make really big decisions. I mean, there isn't many other things in life that hit on every single aspect of your world, from long-term retirement type issues to short-term, where am I going to live? How am I going to manage my children? I'm doing an identity shift. I mean, you are like all over the place. Yeah.
Well, and that brings up something else, because a lot of the fear also about keeping the house comes from the sheer fact, as you touched on earlier, is that how am I going to get any kind of funding? I mean, how am I going to get another place? Even if we sell the house, the equity is not enough to go places me out of the market. I'm going to have to go a lot smaller, or the fears of all of these things. How am I ever going to afford a house? I'm going to have to rent. And can I afford a rent? And so these are obviously
Yeah.
factor into all
Well,
of that.
and especially over the last few years where, um, because the interest rates have been down, the market prices have been up. And
Mhm.
then we had that crash beforehand where people like, oh, you suddenly have to put 20% down. How are you even going to, afford to go into a house? And then on top of that, like, oh God, I've got a $2,000 mortgage, but to go rent for something kind of comparable is 4,000 or 3,500. We see these big disparities, and
Right.
I go, well, when you refi though, your mortgage is going to go up. You don't get to keep that same, mortgage typically.
Exactly.
But it's definitely a challenge, and it's hard to, I always say in divorce, 1+1 doesn't equal 2.
No.
It equals about 1.5.
Yeah.
So everyone has to kind of shift a bit, unless you were, living way below your means, and even then your savings take the hit, or your curve there. So it's and and then we go back to, I fall back on the divorce coaching platform of, okay, well, let's talk about house versus home.
Mm,
So, it's not always about the four walls around you. It's about the energy and what you create in the space.
exactly.
And, a lot of times the stuff around you doesn't even matter,
No.
you know?
Downsizing is nice when it's all on your own and you
Yeah.
can do whatever you want with it and you can afford it.
Yep.
But going back to that is something that, for those people who are listening who are contemplating divorce and they are in that compromising situation where they don't have the handle on their finances, what would be your biggest advice for them so that they can prepare themselves in a way that they are not going to be? I mean, there's only so much you can do. It depends on when you're planning on divorcing, but just given some insight. I mean, I could think of a few things, but I'm sure you've got.
I always, just trying to take inventory and stock of what is going on in your financial world. And unfortunately, a lot of people I come in contact with have been financially kind of abused. They've been
Mhm.
cut off from what the full picture is. And so it can be really hard to go find that out. If someone is sort of financially controlling you, though, a way to get information is to say, okay, honey, I hear you. I hear that you think I'm overspending. I hear, you telling me that I'm, bankrupting us, bleeding us dry, whatever the words are, and so let's sit down and do a budget. I need to understand,
Mhm.
at large, what are our goals together so that I can help be a part of the team to make it, get there. And that will sometimes take the person's guard down, so that, and it's honestly a beautiful thing, because it can also release some of those chains of control and make a healthier relationship. So the idea is to use that to get educated about what's going on, and take an interest in what's going on in your finances.
Mhm.
So the other thing that I'll say is, if you've hit tilt, you're going into a divorce and you're still don't have any idea what's going on, then one of the first things that I want, any of my clients to get into, if again, they're the one that needs to get back on their feet, is to get into temporary support orders, so that you can have control of some level of finances and start getting your feet underneath you financially.
Right.
So, and then if you need to start going back to work, let's start having those discussions of what do you need to do to get back to work?
Another thing would be, and I think this is a problem for me, and I remember this really well, is establishing your own credit. So no matter where you are in, and I think,
Well, I'm glad you said that.
again, right. And it adds up to it. Yes, you might not have a job, and yes, you might not, but you have a credit card. You start, start small, put certain things in your name that you pay monthly. right? I mean, that has got to help the situation.
If anyone is not under their own credit that's listening, go right now, run your credit report, see what is out there, what's on it, what is your credit score, and open a credit card and use it a little bit, pay it off every month, but just start building that up. And I mean, because if you are out on your own, suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, I can't refinance a car. I can't go buy a new car. I can't lease a car. I mean, or I can't go and actually get an apartment or a condo or a house. Like going into the rental market with no credit is really difficult.
Right. So this is going to thank you for that, but I'm going to go on, and we have a couple of questions that we had beforehand. So I thought it would be a good idea to share some of these questions. One of our community members that said that, well, they find themselves very ambitious and wanting to grow in their career. But at the same time, knowing that their financial gains will need to be reported to their ex, and that they may be entitled to share them in the form of child support. And that's quite frustrating. And any way around this personal financial dilemma?
So I reached out to this person in advance. She is in California, so this is going to be a bit California specific. A bit of a mindset shift is that child support is for the benefit of the children, and it's food, clothing, shelter. And the idea is to not have really disparate parental scenarios where this person's making a ton of money and this person can't even afford to live. So typically, that's what it happens. And there is the right in California, as your ship rises, so does the child's. It goes up with you. Now, that being said, you typically have to go back to court in order to modify support orders or mediation. And so depending on your situation, it takes a bit. I mean, the person would have to spend some money for you to go in and actually get it modified. And your financial situation would typically have to change by a significant amount.
Right.
Like if you suddenly started making $100,000, $200,000 more, then that person would probably be motivated to go take you back to court to modify child support orders. So with child support, that's the case. Now, I will coach people on the spousal support side of things, that if you are in a state, in a place that has spousal support and you are in a position where you're going to have to pay spousal support, then if I was advocating for the payor, I would tell them to cap it at either marital standard of living or what it was when you guys separated and got, so that if that you did go up in stature, there is no modification available for spousal, only for child.
Right. That's great information and great intel, because people aren't thinking about that at the time.
No.
And this also leads, it's a good segue into a conversation that you and I actually have quite a bit about work and working. And just like this question that was presented, that, the fear of making more money is also the fear of going back to work, because you think that's going to hinder your settlement agreement. We're both on the same page that we think, nope, if you have a chance to work, you work. But anyway,
I get asked this all the time. They're like, well, right, but then that's going to get me less support. And I'm like, right, you're going to have cash in hand now. It's the dollar for dollar isn't the same. So you'll end up with more in your pocket as a result for actually going back to work. Now, and the other thing that happens almost without exception, now there's a couple of exceptions I'll mention momentarily, but almost without exception, if you have any sort of, brain skills, you're going to get minimum wage imputed to you. And imputed means they're just going to say that you can make $15 an hour. And so let's pretend it's around $32,000 a year. They're going to stick that in your column, and you're going to be assumed that they're assuming you make that cash. So you might as well go out and make that cash, rather than it being just like a placeholder. A couple of areas that and we had another question about this, is if there is typically, and this is again, this is California, but I've seen it in multiple states. Support is based on ability of the payer to pay. You can't, you can't bankrupt the party that's paying. Age and health of the payee, ability to earn of the payee.
Mhm.
So you want to look at, and then there's other extraneous circumstances that go on, like if there's a child involved that has special needs or whatever. So all of those things go in too. But you want to look at all of those things when understanding what support looks like.
Mhm.
I always say, go back to work if you can earn it, like, and start now. And by the way, psychologically, it's amazing.
Yep.
Like it really does. And I mean, it boosts, your energy. There's a lot of pride in earning money, that might surprise you, particularly if you've been out of the workforce for a long time. It is difficult with small children. I get it. I honor that. I was divorced with small children. But the other thing I say that, people are like, well, I can't make, I'd have to pay my nanny more than I have to pay, for my kids. And I'm like, okay, let me just walk through this. I go, with the exception of maybe summer, I'm like, during the school year, not COVID, typically you'd drop your kids off at school. You're not paying for childcare for that 5-6 hour period. And then you may have to pay for childcare for a couple of hours. Now that 5-6 hour period, you've earned money and you're still earning money during this period over here. So you might be upside down for these hours over here, but these hours are all profit.
Right.
And people are like, oh, right. I'm like, so just think about those logistics of what it is you're really paying for. Now, it does make a difference during the summer break, because then it's day camps and sports and things like that, and it's expensive to have to pay for that full-time coverage. But there are a lot of great affordable programs out there that you can put your kids in, or a group of friends of mine early on, we did a lot of child swapping.
Oh yeah.
So we just made it
Build
work
community
on
around
people's
that.
different schedules. Yep.
Mhm. Well, I mean, and the bottom line is that if you want to advance in your career and you want to start a career, or you need extra money and you want the autonomy, go for it. Like, go for it. Don't
Yeah.
think that you have to hold it back because of the situation of your divorce. Because at the end of the day, psychologically, that means your ex has a hold on you and will continue.
Yep.
So not only does it make sense, as you've just, have told the audience, that it doesn't make sense financially, because actually it's more of a win for you, but psychologically, we know that it doesn't do you any good to hold back.
Nope. Nope.
So then the next question was, then how do you get over the fact that you are paying your ex alimony, and when it feels completely unfair and unnecessary? Have you known of cases where cohabitation has been a successful justification for terminating alimony?
Yes, and I totally empathize. The person who's the payor, there is a lot of frustration on that part. And I'll tell you also, a lot of times as the payee, people don't feel super proud about it either. I mean, they're like, oh, I don't really want to rely on my ex-husband for support. And so it does go both ways. And the other part that I'll tell you, that I've worked with a lot of really successful women, no one gets more pissed than a female paying. It's very interesting psychologically, but women who have to pay support really get fired up. And sometimes I'll see that they want to buy out the support clause. They're like, I am not doing this. Like, and there's just a lot of different gender roles that are kind of tied up in all of that. So the cohabitation one is very interesting. Yes, that is, again, California, well, not even California specific, really. So you can, cohabitation shows that the other person's need has decreased in what it is that they require. And so they get access to someone else's funds. Now, if that other person is like really poor and not
Contributing.
contributing, and that
Mhm.
person is just generously doing that, then there needs to take a look at, like, is that them hiding funds, or is that person really like just can't contribute to, supporting the household. But cohabitation and then marriage, typically almost across the board, unless negotiated, kills spousal support.
Mhm.
So, but cohabitation modification, absolutely.
Okay.
That is not abnormal at all.
Good to know. Because that is frustrating. And it is interesting what you said about being a woman and being absolutely upset. But, and I'm not generalizing here, but a lot of times it's the women who are also looking after the kids and in that role of also having to pay. So it's a double
Cool.
whammy. And I think that's the frustration where it comes in. So,
Especially when, if there's like if, and again, if it's like a stay-at-home dad kind of situation, I see all of the anger and frustration on both ends.
right.
Um, but when it's someone who's like kind of running parallel path and they make around the same amount of money to they're like, but one person's a little bit higher up, like the female, they still get, they just get really mad.
Yeah. And I
And
don't blame.
I don't blame them either.
So, as a single person and a parent, there are specific financial protections one should have in place for future security in terms of savings, like the 401k, the 529 for kids, college, etc. So, how does that play into the situation?
So when it comes to the divorce part of things, you would want to look at splitting. Well, okay, so if I look at, you know, for things that you should have in place, I would sit down and look specifically at your portfolio and talk to your financial advisor.
Hmm.
Now, one of the other nuances that I will hear people employ as a strategy, I see it pretty regularly, is to stop contributing to your 401k in order to reduce your spousal and child support.
Interesting.
And the way that the calculators work, and this is again a bit California oriented, we have a very statutorily mandated calculator for determining child support. Because it reduces, if you give to your 401k, it gets added back to your income available for support. It's a tax deferred situation. And so if you stop paying it, then your taxable income is higher and therefore income available for support is lower. But if you're deferring, your 401k gets added back and it says it's not taxable. So you end up paying on a larger base. So people will use that as a strategy. Now, again, going back to cutting off the nose to spite your face, similar to the job situation, I'm like, it's your 401k. Like, you do want it to grow. You want it to be tax deferred. It's a bit silly to do that in the short term. And when you go in for modification or someone does later, it'll catch up to you.
Right.
So, but when it comes to all the other portfolios, I'm a believer in 529. I'm a believer in retirement savings. I would definitely reach out to your financial advisor and find out how your portfolio is stacked right now. Cause that's, you've got to look at your holistic portfolio for where the best place is to keep your money and build your wealth.
Great.
So hopefully that answered that question.
I'm at the end of the questions that came in earlier on, and a lot of the questions that, we went over quite a few things. So I was just going to open it up to our participants. If anyone has a particular question, you can put it in the chat. We can stop recording if you want to put in the chat that you'd like to actually talk to Heather, and we can keep this completely confidential. So we're happy to stop the recording. If no one wants to write anything in the chat. I'm not stopping the recording yet, but
No.
I don't see any questions.
And one thing that I'll do while we're waiting to see if anyone figures out the typing thing, because sometimes on your phone it's hard. So if you're going out to look for a CDFA in your market, I would tell you to look within your state lines typically, or find someone who says, hey, like, I have a friend that works in Washington State and Florida. Those are her two resident domains. just because there are a lot of details, particularly in court filings and settlements and temperature of the court. And there's community property, there's equitable distribution, there's different implications if you're in an at-fault state. There's a lot of very state specific. It doesn't necessarily need to be like you need to find someone in your county, but I definitely would look within the state areas. And then the next piece of things that I would look at is making sure that this is their primary business. There are a lot of people who do get this, not a lot, but there's people who get this accreditation just for education purposes. Or they want to help their wealth managers, and they want to help their clients who do get a divorce in order to retain the business, which is super legit. But if you don't really understand and work in this, part to full time, it's very hard to really understand the family law code and to get educated and to work really effectively across the attorney, mediation, client world. You really want someone who's educated in your space.
Right.
So that would be my plug for finding a great resource. And then I would also ask if you have any specifics in your case, like, so for example, there's people who are really good advocates, there's people who are really good neutrals, and talking to people about what it is that you need in your case. Like, for example, I have learned throughout my practice, I'm really a great advocate. I'm passionate about doing the strategic thinking with someone and playing, understanding the chess game and moving things around the board. I'm not very good. I do not have a good poker face when it comes to two people independently sitting with me and me knowing that this person is way out of his or her league and this person is taking advantage. Like, I instantaneously am like, oh, wait a minute. Like, I jump. And so I can't I can't mediate. It's just not.
There are CDFAs out there who do mediate.
And who are great at it.
You know, a few in California, if anybody does need a mediated.
And I've got, yes, exactly. And they come into, there's a style of divorce that we've talked about before, a collaborative divorce. We'll usually have, they call themselves financial neutrals. So they're gathering all the paperwork, all the statements, putting together the whole inventory, the financial, setup, and then helping to negotiate the settlement between the two. So there are people that are really good at that, and it works for those people. And they are good at helping with the less educated person. And sometimes they'll send them, like, they'll say, hey, go call Heather and she'll come in and be on your side, and this person will still be the neutral. So I do that too. So there's a lot of just different nuances. And then look for, like, if you're, I hate saying this word, I need it, silver divorce, gray divorce, what's the best way? 55 and older? Mature divorce. Yeah, those are also have some interesting nuances, because you have typically planned on retiring together, and so there's a lot of equalization that has to happen to keep all of that fair going into then retiring with not under the same budgetary assumptions.
Right.
So I would definitely just look at that for specialties.
And we want to caveat the word fair in divorce really doesn't exist, but
the F word of divorce. Nothing ever feels fair in divorce, especially with the money.
Not fair, but educated. And I think that's what's important, because as long as you know what's in front of you, you feel better about it, instead of being completely sideswiped, or about 5 years down the road going, what did I do? Why did I make those decisions? Even 5 months down the road, it's that's the scary bit. I mean, that's one of the most important things to set your new life up, is not just the emotional stability and what you have to go through, but your finances.
And once assets are settled and they're split forever. Like, you can't actually typically, unless there's like a fraudulent, non-disclosed asset situation, and even then that asset's probably going to disappear really fast. you can't go back and like split a house or a 401k. Like once the 401k has been split, it's split. Like
Right.
you're done.
Right.
So you can never clawing back things in the financial settlement is very, very difficult.
Right. I put Heather's email in here at heather@splitfyi.com. If you guys do have any other questions that you don't have for us right now, please be in touch with her. She's awesome. She helps me with all of my finances, that's for sure. And we're going to turn off the recording. If you guys do want to come on and have some questions, Q&A time, by all means, please do. So I'll let Heather take care of the recording.
Thank you everyone for attending another episode of Splitting Smart.
Mm-hmm.
We'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Mm-hmm.